mechanics gave up on a 37-year-old Hell's Angels bike. A young boy said, "I'll make it run again." They said the bike was dead, said time had already claimed it. 5 mechanics agreed. Grown men with decades in their hands walked away. Then a boy barely old enough to vote touched cold metal and said something no one expected. "I'll make it run again." The motorcycle sat under flickering fluorescent lights like a body waiting to be identified. Dust clung to it, the way grief clings to a room long after the funeral is over. The air smelled of oil, old rubber, and something heavier, history. Every man in that garage felt it, even if none of them said a word. Tommy Vega stood with his arms crossed, boots planted on concrete he'd poured himself 30 years earlier. His garage wasn't fancy. No glass walls, no digital screens, just tools that had outlived marriages, friendships, and promises. Machines didn't lie. They either worked or they didn't. And this one hadn't worked in 40 years. The Hells Angels didn't rush him. They never did. 3 of them stood near the flatbed truck, leather vests faded from sun and miles. The tallest man, gray beard split by a scar above his eye, finally reached for the top. The sound it made when he pulled it back felt too loud. Metal met air. The bike underneath looked like it had been dragged out of a river of years. Chrome dulled into something closer to bone. Rust bloomed across the tank in dark, ugly patches. Tires sagged like tired shoulders. The frame carried scars that didn't come from crashes, but from waiting too long to be touched. Tommy exhaled slowly. He didn't need a flashlight, didn't need to crouch. He knew this machine the way you recognize someone from behind, even after decades apart. His fingers twitched at his side, remembering a different time, a different road. "I know this bike," he said quietly. The scarred man nodded once. "Then you know why we're here." Tommy did, and that was the problem. This wasn't about money, or pride, or even mechanics. This bike carried a name that still echoed in places people didn't talk about anymore. It carried the memory of a man who never got old enough to slow down. A man who believed machines, like people, deserved loyalty. Tommy looked at the bike again. Time had done its worst. Stillness had eaten it from the inside, and everything he'd learned told him the same truth. Some things don't come back, he swallowed. "Give me 3 days," he said. None of them smiled. Got it. The Hells Angels didn't explain themselves at first. They never did. They let silence speak, let weight settle. Tommy had learned long ago that when men like this showed up without threats or smiles, it meant something deeper was on the line. The scarred man finally stepped forward. His boots sounded heavy, final. "This bike belonged to Ghost," he said. The name hit the room like a dropped wrench. Tommy's jaw tightened. He hadn't heard that name spoken out loud in years, not since the night rain soaked the highway and sirens cut through the dark, not since a promise was left unfinished. Ghost wasn't just a rider, he was a builder, a man who didn't believe in replacing what could be saved. He welded frames by hand, tuned engines by ear, and trusted machines the way some people trust prayer. He built this bike in 1985, piece by piece, for the road and for the brotherhood. And when Ghost died, the bike stopped moving too. They kept it locked away, covered, untouched. A shrine disguised as neglect. "Why now?" Tommy asked. The shortest angel spoke up. His voice was softer than expected. "Because we're losing people," he said. "Old ones, young ones, and every time we bury someone, that bike feels heavier." They didn't want a showpiece, didn't want a museum rebuild. They wanted to hear it breathe again, just once. Proof that something from their past could still answer when called. Tommy walked around the bike again. Slower this time. He saw Ghost's fingerprints in the weld, the way the tank sat slightly off-center, the small imperfections that made it his. "I can try," Tommy said, "but I won't lie to you." The tall angel nodded. "We didn't come for lies." By the end of the first day, the garage looked like a crime scene, parts everywhere. Fuel lines cracked open, rust flaking like dead skin. Every system told the same story. Time had won. Tommy didn't sleep that night. He sat in the garage alone, lights dimmed, running his hands over cold metal, whispering apologies to a machine that had waited too long. Somewhere between regret and exhaustion, he realized something painful. Even loyalty has limits. Tommy called in favors he'd been saving for funerals. Men and women who knew engines the way surgeons know veins. People who didn't guess. People who were rarely wrong. Ray Booker arrived first. Clean hands, clean notes. 20 years rebuilding police Harleys that had been beaten, wrecked, and resurrected. He circled the bike once, then twice, his face tightening with every step. "This isn't neglect," Ray said. "This is abandonment." Linda Kaczynski showed up an hour later, grease-stained jeans, sharp eyes, no patience for hope without math behind it. She pulled the spark plugs and didn't bother hiding her reaction. "These are fossils," she muttered. They worked in silence for hours. Fuel lines crumbled. Wiring insulation fell apart at a touch. The frame revealed hairline fractures that made Linda step back like she'd touched something unsafe. By the second day, the truth was unavoidable. "This bike isn't asleep," Ray said, holding up a corroded line. "It's gone." Linda didn't argue. She never did unless she meant it. "Even if you replaced everything," she said, "you'd still be lying to yourselves." Tommy listened. He didn't fight them. He'd already seen it, felt it. The bike had been still too long. Movement keeps machines alive. Stillness kills them quietly. On the third day, they stood around the workbench like mourners. 2 pages of notes, photos, measurements, proof. Ray rested a hand on Tommy's shoulder. "You did what you could." Tommy nodded, but his eyes stayed on the frame. The garage felt smaller, heavier. That's when the door opened. Jessie Carter wasn't supposed to be there. 18 years old. Too young to be taken seriously, too young to carry confidence without apology. He grew up 3 blocks away, fixing lawnmowers for neighbors who couldn't afford replacements. He rebuilt his first engine from scrap before most kids learned to drive. He walked in carrying a toolbox older than him. Sunlight framed his silhouette as he stopped short, eyes locked on the bike. Not the men, not the tension, just the machine. Tommy turned. "Can I help you?" Jessie didn't answer. He crossed the garage, set his toolbox down gently, and placed his hand on the frame, like checking for a heartbeat. Ray straightened. "We're busy." Jessie crouched, tracing welds, feeling cracks, listening. "You're giving up on her," he said quietly. Linda scoffed. "She's done." Jessie stood and looked at Tommy, really looked. "I'll make it run again." The room froze. Ray laughed once, sharp, unkind. "Kid!" Tommy raised a hand. Something in Jessie's eyes stopped him. Not arrogance, belief, the dangerous kind. "How long?" Tommy asked. 5 days, Jessie said. "If I fail, I walk away." Silence stretched. Tommy nodded. 5 days, he said. Word spread fast. By the second morning, people stopped by pretending they had errands. Mechanics watched from doorways. The angels didn't interfere. They just waited. Jessie worked differently. No rush. No shortcuts. He cleaned before replacing, prepared before discarding. He spoke to the bike when no one was listening. On day 3, something snapped. A bolt refused to move. Jessie slammed his fist into the concrete and sat there breathing hard. Tommy sat beside him. "You don't owe this machine anything." Jessie shook his head. "Neither did it, but it still showed up." Day 4 came quiet. On the 5th morning, the angels returned. Jessie wiped his hands, stepped back. "Try it," he said. Tommy turned the key. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the engine coughed. Once, twice, and then it roared, not perfect, not new, but alive. Grown men didn't speak. Some looked away. The bike hadn't just started. It remembered. The sound didn't explode, didn't scream. It answered asterisk. A low, uneven rumble filled the garage, vibrating through concrete, tools, bones. The bike coughed again, then settled into a rough idle like an old man clearing his throat after years of silence. Smoke curled from the exhaust, thin and gray, carrying the smell of fuel and memory. No one moved. Tommy's hand stayed on the ignition longer than it needed to. His eyes glistened, but he didn't blink. He'd heard this engine before, decades ago, on a highway that felt endless back then. The Hell's Angels stood frozen. Leather creaked as one of them shifted his weight. Another quietly removed his gloves, staring at the bike like it had just spoken his name. Ray's mouth was open. He closed it slowly. "That's not possible." Linda stepped closer, listening, not to the noise, to the rhythm, her brow furrowed. "It's not knocking," she said softly. "It's balanced." Jessie stood back, arms hanging loose, chest rising and falling. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He just watched the bike breathe, like you watch someone you love wake up after a long surgery. The engine sputtered, then smoothed out. Not perfect. Never would be, but alive in the only way that mattered. Tommy finally turned the key off. The silence afterward felt louder than the sound had been. The tall angel stepped forward, voice thick. "You didn't just fix it." Jessie looked up. "I didn't fix it," he said. "I listened." No one laughed this time. Tommy walked to Jessie and held out his hand. Jesse wiped his palm on his jeans before taking it. "Where'd you learn to work like that?" Tommy asked. Jesse shrugged. "My dad," he said. Then, after a pause before he left, the words settled heavy. Outside, a truck passed. Inside, something unspoken shifted. The bike had started, but the story was just beginning. They didn't ride it that day. Some things needed respect before celebration. The angels returned the next morning, quieter than before. One of them carried a helmet, its paint cracked and faded. He placed it gently on the seat. "Ghost S," he said. Tommy understood. He rolled the bike into the sunlight. Dust lifted from the tires as they touched asphalt for the first time in decades. The engine started on the first try. Neighbors came out of their houses. Phones stayed in pockets. Some things didn't need recording. The tall angel swung a leg over the bike but didn't start it. He just sat there, hands resting on the bars, eyes closed. "He built this when none of us had much," he said. "We thought we had time." He didn't finish. Jesse stood nearby, hands in his pockets, unsure where he belonged in this moment. The angel turned to him. "You ride." Jesse shook his head. "Not like that." The man nodded. "Good, then you'll live longer." They laughed softly, real laughter, the kind that surprises you. The bike didn't go far, just down the road, just enough to say goodbye. When it returned, the angel dismounted and rested his forehead against the tank. "Thank you," he whispered. That night Tommy stayed late. Jesse stayed too. They cleaned tools in silence. "You ever think about staying?" Tommy asked. Jesse hesitated. "I can't afford school." Tommy smiled. "Neither could I." The garage felt bigger somehow. The angels kept their word. They didn't take the bike. "It belongs here now," the tall one said, "where it was brought back." They left an envelope on the workbench. Tommy didn't open it until they were gone. It was enough to keep the garage alive another decade. Jesse started showing up every morning. He didn't ask for pay. Tommy paid him anyway. They worked on forgotten machines, old trucks, bikes no one else wanted. Jesse learned patience. Tommy learned trust. One afternoon, Jesse found a photo in a drawer. Two young men. One was Tommy, the other was Ghost. "You never told me," Jesse said. Tommy nodded. "Some stories don't like being told." The bike sat in the corner, polished but not perfect. A reminder, movement keeps things alive. Stillness kills them. Years passed. Jesse grew into his hands. His confidence quieted, deepened. People asked for him by name. Tommy watched from a distance, proud and afraid all at once. The bike never left. It started once a month, just to breathe. On a warm afternoon, Tommy handed Jesse the keys to the garage. "I'm tired," he said. Jesse swallowed. "I'm not ready." Tommy smiled. "Neither was I." The bike sat between them, silent, patient. Some things don't die, they wait. Absolutely. The garage changed in quiet ways. Not the tools or the walls, but the space between moments. Where silence used to feel heavy, it now felt shared. Tommy didn't announce his bad days. Jesse learned to hear them anyway. Slower steps. The way Tommy leaned a little longer against the workbench before standing straight again. The pauses mid-sentence that didn't used to be there. One afternoon, rain pressed against the roll-up door, steady and patient. Tommy sat on an old stool, watching Jesse rebuild a carburetor with hands that no longer shook when things went wrong. "You remind me of him sometimes," Tommy said. Jesse didn't ask who. "Ghost never rushed either," Tommy continued. "People thought he was slow. He was. He just listened longer than most." Jesse tightened a bolt, then loosened it a quarter turn. "My dad used to say the same thing," he said. "Said machines tell you when you're lying to them." Tommy smiled faintly. They didn't talk about fathers after that. Outside, thunder rolled. Inside, the bike sat still, catching light along its tank like it was paying attention. That night, Tommy couldn't sleep. His hands ached in a way they hadn't before. Not pain exactly, more like warning. He walked into the garage and sat beside the bike, rested a hand on the seat. "I kept you alive longer than I should have," he whispered. He didn't know if he meant the bike or himself. It happened on a Tuesday, the kind of day that doesn't warn you. Tommy collapsed between the lift and the workbench. No dramatic fall, just a slow surrender of strength. Jesse heard the sound before he saw him, the stool tipping, the wrench clattering. Jesse was on his knees in seconds, calling his name, hands shaking now. The ambulance lights painted the garage red and white. The bike watched from the corner. Doctors spoke carefully. "You got lucky," one said. Tommy nodded, too tired to argue. When he came back, the garage smelled different, cleaner. Jesse had reorganized everything. Labels, order, care. I didn't know if you were coming back, Jesse admitted. Tommy sat heavily. Neither did I. The unspoken truth settled between them. Time doesn't ask permission. Tommy made the years later, people still asked about the bike. Not tourists, not collectors, people who had lost something, a brother, a parent, a version of themselves they didn't recognize anymore. They'd walk into the garage pretending they needed a repair, then their eyes would drift to the corner. That the Hell's Angels bike? They'd ask. Jesse never answered right away. He'd finish tightening a bolt, wipe his hands, then nod. Yeah. He didn't tell the full story unless someone stayed long enough to deserve it. The bike wasn't a relic. It wasn't roped off. It gathered dust like everything else that lived. Once a month, Jesse rolled it outside and started it. The sound traveled down Route 49, low and steady. People paused when they heard it. Some closed their eyes without knowing why. Tommy came by sometimes, slower now, cane in one hand, coffee in the other. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. One afternoon, Jesse asked, "Do you ever regret not riding it again?" Tommy watched the bike idle. "No," he said, "it wasn't meant for me anymore." He rested his hand on Jesse's shoulder. Some things pass through your life to prepare you for who comes next. That night, Jesse stayed late. The garage empty except for the hum of lights and the ticking of cooling metal. He sat on the floor beside the bike, back against the workbench, and let the silence speak. He thought about his father, about Ghost, about all the people who leave pieces of themselves behind without knowing who will pick them up. The bike stood there patiently, still, alive, waiting. On the 10th anniversary of the day the bike ran again, the Angels returned, older, fewer. They didn't bring a truck this time. They rode in quietly and parked along the road. No ceremony, no speeches. The tall man with the scar walked into the garage and stopped in front of the bike. His hands trembled slightly as he touched the tank. "She's still breathing?" he asked. Jesse nodded. "Always." They stood there together, long enough for memory to soften. "We lost another one last winter," the man said, "but he heard the story before he went." Jesse swallowed. "That matters." The angel smiled. "Yeah, it does." When they left, the road felt emptier, but lighter. That evening, Jesse locked up the garage and stood for a moment under the faded sign. He looked at the grease on his hands, the same kind that never fully washes away. He finally understood what the bike had taught him. Some things don't need to be perfect to be worth saving. Some things don't break, they wait. He reached back inside and turned off the lights. The bike rested in the dark, not forgotten, just ready.